Welcome back to Delays After Dark, the podcast where we explore the darkest corners of history, mystery, and the macabre. I'm Orion, your guide for tonight's deep dive, and tonight we're going through what is technically part two of our Jack the Ripper episode.
And I'm Ducky, here to ask the tough questions, dig up facts, and keep Orion on her toes, just like this case would.
Tonight, we're unraveling one of the most chilling mysteries in American crime history, the Zodiac Killer. Over 5 decades have passed since his reign of terror, yet his identity remains one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries. We'll cover the crimes, the ciphers, the investigation, and the theories, both official and personal. So buckle up because this one is as twisted as it gets.
And reminder that this isn't just about the crime, it's about the enduring questions. Who was the Zodiac? Why did he kill? And how did he evade justice for so long? And right before we dive in, I would just like to preface that I'm going to let Orion take a little bit of a lead on this because I have a very disdainment for this case. I'm not a big fan of this case, but let's dive in.
That no better way to say it. Let's set the stage. It's the late 1960s, a tumultuous time in American history, as you all remember, I'm sure, if you're old enough to know anything about history. The Vietnam War was raging, the civil rights movement was transforming the nation, and the counterculture movement was in full swing. San Francisco and the surrounding Bay Area were at the epicenter of this cultural revolution.
But beneath all that free love and protest energy, there was a darker side crime. Crime rates were climbing, and the law enforcement was struggling to keep up.
Mm. Enter the Zodiac Killer. His crimes
What's he know?
began in December 1968. Hold it together. But the fear he inspired would linger for decades. On December 20th, 17-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and 16-year-old David Faraday were parked on Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California. They were on their first date. Around 11 p.m., a car pulled up beside them. The driver exited, approached their vehicle, and randomly opened fire.
Betty Lou tried to run. She was shot multiple times in the back. David was killed with a single shot to the head while still in the car. It was brutal, methodical, and completely senseless.
And this is the key. There was no clear motive. There was no robbery. There was no signs of a personal vendetta. Nothing. It was simply murder for the sake of murder. And this was the beginning of the Zodiac's reign of terror. Fast forward 7 months to the night of July 4th, 1969. So you got to figure it's Independence Day. There's people doing fireworks, all kinds of fun stuff like that. They had their picnics earlier in the day. And, it's generally just a good day for most people in the States, right? Wrong. Darlene Farron, who was 22, and Michael McGough, who was 19, were parked at Blue Rock Springs Park, just a few miles from where the first attack happened. A car pulled up beside them twice before the driver finally approached them with a flashlight.
And that's when he opened fired, shooting both of them multiple times. Darlene died from her injuries, but Michael miraculously survived.
That's something, isn't it? Shortly after the attack, the Vallejo Police Department received an anonymous call. The man on the other end of the line claimed responsibility for the attack, and he even gave directions to the scene. He also took credit for the murders of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. This was our first real glimpse of the Zodiac's need for recognition.
And that brings us to the letters. On July 31st, 1969, three newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicles, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times Herald, received identical letters from the killer, each including a cipher containing 408 symbols.
Ridiculous. The Zodiac demanded the ciphers be published, or else he'd kill again. A school teacher and his wife cracked the code within a week, revealing a chilling message. Quote, I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. End quote.
But then, no clues to his identity, just a declaration of his twisted motivations.
Ugh. On September 27th, 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time in Napa County. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, both college students, were enjoying a picnic at Lake Berryessa when a man in a hooded costume approached them. Weird. His outfit was emblazoned with his now iconic cross circle symbol.
He tied them up, claimed he was an escaped convict who needed money and a car, and then brutally stabbed them. Cecilia was stabbed 10 times and Brian 6. Miraculously, though, Brian survived.
Starting to see a pattern here. After the attack, the Zodiac called the police from a payphone, calmly reporting the crime, taking credit. This was his most theatrical attack yet, and it cemented his reputation as a calculating and fearless killer. The Zodiac's final confirmed murder was on October 11th, 1969. Paul Stein, a 29-year-old cab driver, was shot in the head in San Francisco's upscale Presidio Heights neighborhood. Unlike previous attacks, this victim was male and alone.
This crime was especially bold, too, because it happened in the middle of a busy city. Witnesses saw a man leaving the scene, and the Zodiac even wiped down the cab before walking away.
Shortly after, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter containing a piece of Stein's bloodied shirt proving the killer's identity. The letter also included a threat to attack school buses, sparking widespread panic. Over the next several years, the Zodiac continued to send letters, taunting police, claiming additional murders, including more ciphers. He even gave himself a scorecard, updating his victim count to show his dominance. Gross.
Yeah, and the media became his unwitting accomplice, publishing his letters and feeding his need for notoriety. At one point, he even threatened to blow up a school bus, which led to heightened security measures across the region.
Unfortunately, despite the publicity and numerous tips from lots of different people and lots of different resources, the Zodiac was never caught. His letters became more erratic over time, and eventually they stopped altogether.
All right, now let's talk about the investigations. Police face numerous challenges, including jurisdictional issues and limited forensic technology. Despite this, they pursued several promising suspects.
The most famous suspect, the most famous suspect underneath their scrutiny at the time, Arthur Lee Allen. He was linked to the case through circumstantial evidence, including a watch with the Zodiac symbol on it and suspicious comments that he had made to his own personal acquaintances. But DNA testing, later on, it ruled him out.
Other suspects included Ted Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber, and even fringe theories involving a conspiracy, but none of these theories ever led to a definitive answer.
And that brings us forward to the theories. Was the Zodiac a military man with expertise in cryptography? Was he a law enforcement officer, which could explain his ability to evade capture? Or was he simply an ordinary man hiding in plain sight?
There are also theories that he didn't act alone. Some believe he had an accomplice or a copycat murderer, though uh, copycat copycats muddied the water, making it impossible to separate fact from fiction.
Hmm. Another possibility is that he stopped killing, or even that he died. Serial killers rarely stop voluntarily, but if he were in his late 20s or early 30s in 1969, he'd be in his 80s or 90s now, if he's even alive. So I hesitate to ask this question, Duck, because I know that you feel very
Mhm.
strongly about this case. What can you tell me about your personal opinions and theories regarding the Zodiac Killer?
So, the big thing is, even if he was Ted Kaczynski's dead now. So, there's that. Second off, I absolutely hate everything about this killer because of how he targeted people and how he was just kind of cocky asshole, right? So, he was somewhat a copycat killer of Jack the Ripper. He targeted mainly women, mostly by stabbing. Obviously, there was the gunshots that he did, and there were male victims, but most of his male victims survived, right? Now, threatening, like, his whole thing was just publicity, and I don't blame him specifically for the hate I have against him. I blame the newspapers and I blame San Francisco police because he was looking for notoriety, and he even told them that's what he was looking for, and they fucking gave it to him, right? Like, it seems like this case was just kind of like the John Benet Ramsey case. They just didn't care. They did absolutely nothing to stop him. They, like, of course there was investigations, but really they were like, "Oh crap, he killed someone.
Take
Oh
a
well."
breath,
Right?
Duck.
Right? And then he killed someone in the middle of a street and no one did anything about it. Like, are am I stupid? Like, am I living in the same world as everyone else? Like, I understand this was what, it was the 60s, so what, like fucking 60 years ago
Forever
now?
ago.
Yeah, like but was everyone still living in their own world so much to where they couldn't have been like, hey, I just watched that guy get absolutely capped in the middle of the street. He's cleaning it up actually as we speak. Should we do anything? No, honestly, just let him live. Like, why I hate everything about this killer. I hate everything he stood for. I hate how he just went after college students and then he started targeting kids. And then after that, like, the police were pretty much useless. I understand you can't have like a definitive, like, he was very good at evading the police. I understand that. But it just seems like the more you look into this case, the more it was just nothing. Like, there was nothing put towards actually solving this case or stopping anything. They just kind of ignored it and hoped it would go away and then published every letter he sent in the newspaper. Like, this is my thought process. If they didn't publish it, if they didn't publish all of his stuff and make him as famous, would everyone have died? Like, was most of his other victims preventable? But
You
instead,
make a
what we
good point
got
there.
was that.
You make a very good point there because honestly, he was clearly stating that he was searching for some type of recognition and fame. And similar to Jack the Ripper, like we mentioned, his killings were all very close in proximity. Not quite as close as Jack the Ripper's, but he did have an issue with females, and it seemed like particularly college aged females. And yes, he did either hurt or kill their partners or the person who was with him at the time, whether he thought about it or not. He definitely had some type of sick, like, god complex or some type of shit where he had this desperate need for the attention from killing. So, you have to think about, well, you don't have to think about, but it leads me to think about, was he like starved for attention and affection in his childhood? Was he, socially inept? Did he have problems with the ladies? Was he gay and not trying to let people know that he was gay? And the slight obsession with the women in the situation, did that cover something up, or what was the reasoning behind it? And because at this point the dude is most likely dead, that's the most likely outcome of this, is that the dude is already dead. It's been a hot minute. Because of that, we will never get answers to these questions. Even with all of the advancements that we've had in technology, even with all of the reopenings of big high profile cases like this, we don't get the answers that we're searching for most of the time. And in a situation like this, where you have somebody who's basically a copycat killer, who could have also potentially had his own copycat killers, it leads to some very frustrating questions and concerns about this case.
Yeah, and I 100% blame the media because I think that they're a lot to blame for this because it was just he it said he was looking for notoriety, and instead of not giving, that's one of the things that angers me so much about the news is a lot of people, especially some people who commit crimes today, they do it for the notoriety. They don't do it like they do it because they want to be famous. Like that's what a lot of domestic terrorists and like even some school shooters who again are domestic terrorists, but that's what they're looking for. And the fact that we give it to them in the end, I think is such a horrible, horrible thing to do because we're making these people household names kind of because of the crappy things that they've done. And that's what they wanted, and we gave it to them. They did this horrible act and took people's lives to get this thing, and instead of making it to where they just disappear, and it's they instead they get exactly what they wanted, and it's such a just shitty concept, and it's something that angers me, and specifically about this case, it's just I don't understand why we do it.
It's definitely depressing and frustrating to see that in a moment where potentially harm and death towards further victims could have been prevented by the media chose instead to take the information and run with it rather than preventing the information from being made public and seeing what would happen afterwards. You know, if he hadn't had this information made public, if he hadn't been sensationalized in this way, could there have been an opportunity? And, you know, he probably would have killed again, yes. But would there have been better opportunity to try to track him down and kill him by keeping what he said in the cipher letters private? Was there more opportunity to look into further details of what he was saying later on when he would call in or write in and be like, hey, this is what I did, this is where it happened, this is when it happened, that is so on and so forth. Enough information could have been actually perceived by law enforcement had there not been a media sensation to further feel out whether or not the details could have given further indication of where he could have been found next, what type of victim he would have been targeting next, or the areas in which he's likely to target victims. There could have been an opportunity to catch this man.
Yes, and it's just we I feel like this is one of those cases where we just completely dropped the ball. I mean, I think honestly in the 60s and 70s, the United States as a whole kind of just dropped the ball. So I think it's just it's a really crappy case in general, and I don't know. It just seemed like wherever he ended up, I hope it is. Honestly, I just hope he's rotting in a prison cell somewhere. I hope he did get caught for something else, and he's just still there. That is, I don't know. I don't know where to go with this. I'm just angry. I hate this case so much.
Because you and your homies, you hate the Zodiac. And
We
I
hate the
can't say that I
Zodiac Killer.
disagree.
Yeah.
Even so, over 50 years later, the Zodiac case remains unsolved. Advances in DNA technology have reopened cold cases, and in 2021, a group called the Case Breakers claimed to have identified the Zodiac, but their evidence hasn't been universally accepted, and law enforcement remains cautious. Officially, the case is still open, and the Zodiac's identity is unconfirmed.
Yes, and it's a very, very upsetting and frustrating case. And we have so much information, the letters, the ciphers, the witness descriptions, and even partial DNA profiles. But none of it led to a definitive answer. It's like the Zodiac Killer was just taunting us from beyond the grave. Hopefully, that's where he's at.
Exactly. This case is a reminder of the limitations of both technology and human ingenuity. It's also a stark example of how fear can ripple through a community, amplified by media coverage and public fascination, and just a flat out dropping of the ball by the police, maybe.
Yeah, and in this case as a whole isn't just about the crimes. It's about the Zodiac tapped into something way deeper, and it's the fear of the unknown. You know, he's become a symbol of chaos and someone who could strike anywhere at any time and just disappear without a trace, even when he murders in the middle of a busy city.
And that's why this case endures. It's not just about justice for the victims, though they do absolutely deserve that. It's about the need for answers, the human need for answers and closure. Until we know who the Zodiac is 100%, this case will continue to haunt us.
Yeah, and maybe one day we'll have all the answers, but for then, the Zodiac Killer remains one of America's greatest mysteries.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. What if the Zodiac is still out there somewhere, watching, waiting? What if he's been right under our noses this whole time?
I mean, honestly, that's a chilling thought to end on, and I hope he finds this podcast so he knows exactly what people think about us. Speaking about what people think about us, listeners, let us know what your theories are, any questions you have, and what's your thought about the case in the comments. And as always, you can email us with any of your questions, comments, concerns, bitches, moans, or gripes, or any suggestions for any future episodes. Our email address is always in the descriptions of our videos.
That's absolutely right. And we read every single comment and email. We love when you guys interact with us, and we can't wait to hear more from you in the future. Thank you for joining us tonight on this journey into the darkness. That's all we have for today's episode, and time is just about out. So I'm Orion,
And I'm Ducky.
and this has been
Delayed After Dark.